November 8th, 1944. Euro 3:47 hours. Hürtgen Forest, Germany. Temperature 34 degrees. Major Thomas Hartley is holding a compass and a stopwatch. In 17 minutes, 127 men are going to start walking in circles through the most dangerous forest in Europe. And if the timing is off by even 90 seconds, German artillery observers will realize they're seeing the same soldiers over and over again. What Hartley doesn't know, what he can't know, is that 6 miles east, at Wehrmacht Heeresgruppe B headquarters, intelligence officers are already drafting reports of massive American reinforcement, estimated 2 full divisions, based on movement patterns they've been tracking for the past 4 hours. But those reinforcements don't exist. There are 127 men who've been marching the same loop since midnight. The forest smells like wet pine and cordite. Everything smells like cordite in the Hürtgen. The trees are shattered stumps and splintered trunks from weeks of artillery fire. Visibility is maybe 40 yards in the pre-dawn dark, less when the morning fog rolls in. And it will. Hartley's counted on it. The ground is frozen mud that crunches underfoot, loud enough to carry. Hartley checks his watch again. 16 minutes. His executive officer, Captain Bill Warren, stands beside him with a map marked in red grease pencil. 3 overlapping loops, each one timed to the minute. "Sir, if they spot the pattern..." "They won't spot the pattern, that's the whole point. Sir, we're asking guys who've been awake for 36 hours to march precision routes in the dark through a forest where every third tree has a bouncing Betty under it. I know. And if they vary by more than 2 minutes, German observers will see the same platoon pass the same point twice." "I know that too." Warren's voice drops. "Sir, this is insane." "Maybe it is. But here's what the Germans know. American forces are massing for a major offensive. Here's what they think they know. Those forces are concentrated here, in this sector, building up to division strength or greater. Here's what's actually happening. 127 exhausted men from the 28th Infantry Division are walking in carefully timed circles through the Hürtgen, reappearing at observation points exactly when German watchers expect new units to arrive, creating the illusion of an endless column of reinforcements that doesn't exist. It's theatre. It's choreography. It's a magic trick performed with frozen, exhausted soldiers as props. And if it works, the Germans will commit their reserves to defend against a phantom army, pulling strength from the sectors where the real attack is coming. If it doesn't work, 127 men will be court-martialed for desertion because technically they're abandoning their defensive positions to march in circles. Hartley's thumb rests on the stopwatch button. 15 minutes. The question isn't whether the deception will fool the Germans. The question is whether Hartley can keep 127 men marching in synchronized circles for 6 more hours before exhaustion, artillery, or simple human error breaks the illusion. Before the Hürtgen, before the war, before any of this, Thomas Michael Hartley was a stage magician from Atlantic City, New Jersey. Not a headliner, not Houdini. He worked the boardwalk, doing close-up magic for tourists, card tricks and coin manipulation, studying the mechanics of misdirection. His specialty was making people see what wasn't there by showing them what they expected to see. He'd learned the craft from his uncle, Eddie the Magnificent Hartley, who'd worked vaudeville in the 20s. Eddie taught him the fundamental principle. People don't see with their eyes, Tommy. They see with their expectations. Show them what they expect. They'll fill in the rest themselves. Tommy had spent 8 years perfecting it. Not big illusions. Those required apparatus, setup time. His obsession was street magic. Misdirection you could perform anywhere, anytime, with nothing but timing and psychology. He'd stand on the boardwalk with a deck of cards and make grown men swear they'd seen cards change colour, multiply, vanish. They hadn't. They'd seen suggestions of those things, and their brains completed the trick. His defining moment came in summer of '39. A skeptic, loud, drunk, aggressive, challenged him. Said magic was bullshit. Said he'd been watching close and saw how the trick worked. Tommy said, "Okay, do it again," and this time the skeptic could hold his wrists. The man gripped Tommy's wrists tight enough to bruise. Tommy still vanished the card, not with his hands, with the audience's attention. While the skeptic watched Tommy's hands, Tommy's assistant switched the deck. The card never vanished. It was never there. The skeptic left convinced he'd seen actual magic. The assistant, a girl named Ruth, who Tommy would eventually marry, had laughed. You made him think so hard about watching your hands, he forgot other hands existed. That's the game, Tommy had said. Control what they're watching. The rest is invisible. The army looked at his file. Stage performer, excellent spatial awareness, unorthodox problem solving, and made him an infantry officer. By November 44, he was a major in the 28th Infantry Division, pinned down in the Hurtgen Forest, where unorthodox problem solving was the difference between survival and becoming a statistic in the worst battle most Americans have never heard of. But none of that matters if German artillery finds your actual positions. And in the Hurtgen, the Germans were very good at finding positions. That's why Hartley spent November 7th planning a magic trick with 127 men instead of cards. The Hurtgen Forest wasn't supposed to be important. 50 square miles of dense woodland on the German-Belgian border. Terrain so bad that pre-war German military planning had written it off as unsuitable for large-scale operations. But in fall 1944, it became the gateway to the Roer River dams, which controlled flooding that could stop any Allied advance into Germany. So the US First Army attacked into the forest in September. By November, 3 months later, they were still fighting for it. The forest 8 divisions. The 9th Infantry Division went in at full strength, came out combat ineffective. The 28th Infantry Division, Hartley's unit, was next. The tactical problem was geometric and brutal. The forest canopy was so thick that artillery airbursts detonated in the trees, showering defenders with wooden shrapnel that tore through flesh like razors. The Germans had fortified every approach with interconnected bunkers, minefields, and pre-registered artillery zones. Visibility was so limited that engagements happened at ranges under 50 yards. Tanks couldn't maneuver. Air support couldn't see targets. It was 1918 trench warfare in vertical terrain, and the Germans were winning through attrition. They didn't need to attack, just defend, bleed the Americans, rotate fresh units in while American divisions ground themselves to nothing against fortified positions. By November 7th, the 28th Infantry Division was under strength and exhausted. Intelligence reported German reinforcements moving to the sector. 2 battalions, maybe more. V-Corps headquarters issued orders. Hold current positions. Reinforcements will arrive within 72 hours. But those reinforcements were going to the real offensive sector, 15 miles north. The Hurtgen was a holding action, an economy of force operation. The 28th Infantry Division was bait, keep German attention here while the main effort went elsewhere. The problem, if the Germans realized the Hurtgen front was under strength, they'd counterattack, break through, and threaten the entire First Army flank. The 28th had to look strong, look reinforced, look like a threat. With troops they didn't have. The conventional approach was defensive posture. Dig in, be quiet, don't provoke. Hartley's battalion commander, Lieutenant Colonel James Mackenzie, made it explicit. We sit tight, no patrols, no movements that reveal our actual strength. Make them come to us. But Hartley saw a different problem. German observation posts had clear sight lines to the main supply routes. They were watching, counting vehicles, tracking movement, building intelligence pictures. And what they were seeing was accurate. A depleted division going static. On November 7th, at 1400 hours, Hartley approached Mackenzie with a proposal that violated every principle of defensive doctrine. Sir, what if we show them what they expect to see? Mackenzie looked up from his map. Explain. They expect reinforcements. They're watching for them. What if we give them reinforcements, just not real ones? I'm not following. So Hartley explained. Movement patterns, timing, German observation cycles, the psychology of expectation. How you could make 127 men look like 5,000 if you understood what the observers were watching for, not what they were watching at. Mackenzie listened. Then, Major, you're proposing we fake a major reinforcement by marching our troops in circles. Precisely choreographed circles, sir. Yes. That's the most goddamn ridiculous thing I've heard all week. Mackenzie paused. How would it work? The mechanics are elegant, brutally so. German observation works on pattern recognition. Observers watch road junctions, clearings, any point where movement is visible. They count units, estimate strength, report to intelligence. Intelligence correlates reports, builds a picture of enemy dispositions. The key vulnerability. Observers at different points don't communicate in real time. They report up through channels. If Observer A sees a company-size unit at 0400 hours, and Observer B sees a company-size unit 2 miles east at 0445 hours, intelligence assumes those are different units. Why wouldn't they be? Units move forward, they don't loop back, unless they do. Hartley's plan exploited that assumption. 3 loops, each approximately 4.2 miles, designed so that soldiers would reappear at observation points at intervals matching the expected spacing of a division-strength column. Loop timing was critical. Too fast, and observers would spot the same men twice. Too slow, and the reinforcement would appear too small to matter. The math. Average march speed in the Hurtgen was 1.8 miles per hour. Terrain, darkness, and need for silence slowed everything. Each loop took approximately 2 hours 20 minutes. German observation posts were positioned roughly every 200 yards. If you timed it right, a platoon would appear at observation post Alpha, vanish into forest, reappear at OP Bravo 38 minutes later, correct spacing for a moving column, then loop back through dead ground and reappear at OP Alpha again in 2 hours 20 minutes, exactly when the next platoon in a genuine reinforcement column would arrive. It required precision choreography across 3 simultaneous loops, each staggered by 47 minutes to maintain consistent flow of troops past German observers. November 7th, 2200 hours. Hartley assembled his company commanders in a bombed-out aid station that smelled like disinfectant and gangrene. He laid out the plan using a map, grease pencil, and a stopwatch. Gentlemen, we're going to convince the Germans that we've been reinforced by 2 regiments. We're going to do it by walking in circles for 6 hours. Captain Mike Breslin, accompany. Sir, I need you to repeat that because I think I'm having a stroke. You're not having a stroke. Here's the concept, Hartley explained. The loops, the timing, the observation points. As he talked, he watched comprehension dawn on their faces, followed immediately by horror. Captain Ed Kowalski, B Company. Sir, you're asking us to march exhausted men through mined forest in total darkness on split-second schedules. Yes. While maintaining noise discipline so the Germans don't realize we're marching past their positions multiple times. Yes. And if anyone screws up, twists an ankle, takes a wrong turn, stops for too long, the whole illusion collapses. Correct. Breslin. Sir, this is insane. I know. Captain Warren already said that. Hartley looked at each of them. Here's what's also true. The Germans are watching. They know we're under strength. They're deciding whether to counterattack. If they do, we're done. We don't have the strength to hold. Reinforcements are coming. In 72 hours. Maybe. And not here. They're going to the main sector. We're the distraction, the holding force. We need the Germans to think we're strong enough to attack, so they stay defensive instead of realizing we're weak enough to crush. Silence. The aid station's single kerosene lantern cast shadows that made the officers look like ghosts. Lieutenant Jack Spicer, weapons platoon. Sir, what if it works? Then the Germans commit reserves here instead of where they're actually needed. We buy time for the main offensive. And if it doesn't? Then we're court-martialed for abandoning defensive positions during enemy contact. Hartley met his eyes. I'm not ordering this. I'm proposing it. You want to refuse? Put it in writing. I'll take responsibility. Nobody wrote anything. We need volunteers, Hartley continued. 127 men total, 3 platoons plus attachments. They need to be able to march in the dark, follow routes by landmarks and compass, maintain absolute noise discipline, and do it for 6 hours straight. Anyone? Every officer volunteered their best men. Not their freshest. Nobody had fresh men in the Hurtgen. Their best. The ones who could stay awake, stay focused, stay quiet. By midnight, they had their volunteers. By 0300, Hartley was standing in the forest with his stopwatch, ready to start the most elaborate magic trick of his life. He gathered the 1 to 27 men in a clearing. Spoke quietly. "You all know why you're here. What we're doing is technically insane. It's also our best chance. The Germans are watching. We're going to give them a show. 3 groups, 3 routes, all timed. You know your loops, you know your landmarks. Stay quiet, stay on schedule. If you get lost, don't panic. Catch the next group and merge in. If you hit something, mine, patrol, whatever, do not break noise discipline. Take cover and wait for the next group." Private Danny Rourke, barely 20. "Sir, what if the Germans figure it out?" "They won't. Not if we do this right. They're going to see what they expect to see, a major reinforcement column. Their brains will complete the pattern." "And if their brains don't?" Hartley smiled, tired. "Then we just took the strangest 6-hour hike of the war." At 0347, he pressed the stopwatch. "First group, move out." The first loop is nerve-shredding. 38 men moving through darkness so complete you can't see your hand in front of your face, navigating by compass bearing and memorized landmarks, shattered oak, burned out half-track, the corpse pile they're not supposed to talk about but everyone knows. The forest floor is frozen mud mixed with brass casings and shell fragments. Every step crunches. Sergeant First Class Mike Torres leads Group 1. Former hunting guide from Montana, he can navigate in the dark by sound and smell. Right now he smells pine sap and decomposition, hears his men breathing behind him, counts steps. 400 paces to the first turn, then bearing 75 degrees for 600 paces. At 0423, Group 1 passes Observation Point Alpha, a slight rise where German observers have clear line of sight. Torres knows they're being watched, can feel eyes on them. His men are silhouetted against the slightly lighter sky to the east. They march at regulation pace, weapons visible, looking exactly like what they're supposed to be. A fresh rifle company moving to forward positions. Then they're into dead ground, a depression where forest canopy and terrain mask them from observation. Torres checks his watch. 37 minutes to the next observation point. He picks up the pace slightly. They need to bank time for the loop back. Behind Group 1, at exactly 0434 hours, Group 2 departs. Led by Lieutenant Jack Spicer, younger, educated, navigating by precise compass work and measured pace counts. His group has farther to go. Loop 2 is the outer circle, longest route, designed to appear at observation points that should see the tail of the reinforcement column. At 0521, Group 3 moves out. Captain Bill Warren leading personally, taking the shortest loop, the one that has to maintain perfect timing because it reappears at observation points most frequently. By 0600, all 3 groups are in motion, an elaborate dance of men moving through darkness, reappearing at German observation points at mathematically calculated intervals. At German observation post 7, Obergefreiter Hans Weber sits in a camouflage position with binoculars and a field telephone. He's been watching since 0400. At 0423, he spotted movement. Rifle company, approximately 130 men, moving east toward American lines. He reported it. At 0502, he spotted another company. Different route but consistent with a staggered column advance. Reported it. At 0547, another. And another at 0629. By 0700, Weber has counted 8 company-size units. He reports to his battalion. Continued American reinforcement. Estimate regiment strength, possibly more. Movement consistent with major build-up. What Weber doesn't know, he's seen Group 1 4 times and Group 2 twice. Same men, different times, different angles. His brain completed the pattern, reinforcements arriving, and never questioned why the uniforms looked similar, why the march discipline was identical. He expected a column. He saw a column. But here's what Hartley didn't plan for. At 06:12, Group 2 hits a mine. Private First Class Jimmy Kozlowski, near the tail of the column, steps on a shoe mine. Wooden construction, minimal metal, almost impossible to detect. The blast takes his foot off below the ankle. He goes down without screaming, training, shock, something. But he's down, bleeding, and Group 2 has stopped. Spicer is at the front of the column, doesn't hear the blast over movement noise. Takes him 90 seconds to realize his column has stopped. By then, they're 3 minutes behind schedule. 3 minutes means they'll appear at observation point Charlie 3 minutes late. If the timing's that far off, German observers might realize they're seeing repeat patterns. Spicer makes a decision, leaves Kozlowski with a medic and 2 men, violating noise discipline to whisper-shout instructions. Tourniquet, pressure, wait for Group 3. They'll pick you up on their loop. Then he pushes Group 2 hard. Double time through sections where they're masked from observation, making up time. It's dangerous. Men are stumbling, equipment rattling, but they make up 2 minutes. They're still 1 minute late when they pass observation point Charlie. At German OP-12, Feldwebel Klaus Richter notices the gap. The previous American units passed at 38 to 41-minute intervals. This one took 42 minutes. He notes it in his log, but doesn't report it. Variability is normal in troop movements. If the next interval is also long, then it's a pattern. One outlier means nothing. Hartley, monitoring from his command position, doesn't know any of this. He just knows Group 2 is late by his stopwatch. 1 minute, 14 seconds. He's calculating whether to abort, whether the timing is too far off, when Group 2 loops back into dead ground and reappears at OP Alpha right on schedule. Spicer made up the time. Barely. At 07:30, the fog rolls in. This is what Hartley has been counting on. Dense morning fog. Visibility dropping to 15 yards. Now the German observers can't see the soldiers clearly, just shapes moving through mist. Makes the illusion stronger because the observers have to fill in more details themselves. Their brains work overtime completing partial information into full pictures. But the fog also makes navigation harder. Group 1 nearly misses a turn, has to backtrack silently. Group 3 loses sight of their landmarks, navigates by compass alone, comes within 20 yards of a German position without realizing it. German sentries hear something, fire a flare. Hartley's men freeze. The flare illuminates nothing but fog and trees. The Germans decide it was an animal. By 0900, the men have been marching for 5 hours. They're running on fumes, adrenaline, fear, muscle memory. Torres' feet are bleeding in his boots. Half of Group 1 has stress fractures they're not mentioning. Spicer's group picked up Kozlowski's medic and the 2 guards on their 4th loop. Kozlowski himself was evacuated by Group 3 as planned, but now they're carrying extra weight, slowing slightly. Warren's Group 3 is maintaining schedule through sheer willpower. Warren himself has been awake for 41 hours. He's navigating by compass and counting steps like a zombie, trusting his body to autopilot the route. At German Forward Headquarters, intelligence is collating reports. Observation posts have reported consistent American reinforcement from 0400 to 0900 hours. Total estimate, 12 to 14 companies observed, suggesting 2 regiments minimum, possibly a full division. The intelligence officer, Hauptmann Friedrich Steiner, is briefing his commander. Herr Oberst, the Americans are clearly preparing a major offensive in this sector. The reinforcement pattern indicates division-level strength. Oberst Karl Heinrich, regimental commander, studies the map. Recommendations. We should request release of reserves. If they attack with division strength, our current positions won't hold. Request it. The request goes up the chain. By 1000 hours, 2 German battalions from reserve are being repositioned to the Hurtgen sector, exactly what Hartley intended. Except Hartley doesn't know it worked. He's standing in the forest with his stopwatch, watching Group 1 stagger back from their 6th loop, men barely able to stand, and he's calculating whether he can ask them to do one more. Torres collapses against a tree, doesn't speak. Just looks at Hartley with eyes that say, "Sir, we're done." Hartley checks his watch. 0947 hours. 6 hours, 11 minutes since they started. "That's it," he says quietly. "Bring them in. All groups. We're done." Warren staggers in at 1008. Spicer at 10:23. 124 men return. 3 are in the aid station, Kozlowski and 2 others who couldn't continue. 0 killed by the deception. 0 captured. The Germans never realized 127 men had been marching past their observation posts for 6 hours. Hartley's hands are shaking. He doesn't know if it worked. Won't know for hours, maybe days, until intelligence reports come back. He finds Torres, hands him a canteen. "Good work, Sergeant." Torres drinks, then, "Sir, I ever suggest walking in circles again. Shoot me. Deal." Hauptmann Friedrich Steiner realizes something is wrong on November 9th, when interrogation reports from a captured American patrol mention they're from the 28th Infantry Division's 110th Regiment, which, according to Steiner's intelligence reports, should be at full strength with recent reinforcements. The prisoners report their regiment is badly under strength, has been for weeks. No major reinforcements have arrived. Steiner pulls the observation reports from November 8th, reviews them carefully. 12 to 14 companies observed over 6 hours, consistent pattern, multiple observation posts confirming. But if the Americans are under strength, he pulls out a map, plots the observation points, plots the times, starts drawing lines connecting sightings. The pattern emerges slowly. Units appearing at OP7, then OP12, then OP18. Time intervals: 38-41 minutes. Consistent. Too consistent? He measures distances, march times. The geometry doesn't quite work for a straight line column because the observation posts aren't in a line. They're scattered across a 3-mile front. Unless... He draws loops. 3 of them, overlapping, each passing multiple observation posts. "Scheisse," he whispers. He calls his assistant, Lieutenant Werner Koch, shows him the map. "What do you see?" Koch studies it. Takes 5 minutes. Then, "Herr Hauptmann, these could be the same units, moving in circles." "That's what I think too." "But that would mean they faked an entire division's reinforcement with a few companies marching in loops." "Yes." Silence. "That's insane," Koch says. "Yes," Steiner agrees. "It's also brilliant." He writes a report. Brings it to Oberst Heinrich. Heinrich reads it twice, then looks at Steiner like he's sprouted a second head. "You're telling me we repositioned 2 battalions because we were tricked by Americans walking in circles?" "I believe so, Herr Oberst." "You believe so." "The captured prisoners' reports don't match our intelligence estimates. The only explanation that fits all data is coordinated deception through repetitive movement." Heinrich stares at the map. His face goes through several colors. "If this gets out, we're a laughingstock. The entire intelligence section will be reassigned to the Eastern Front." "Yes, Herr Oberst." "You're certain?" 70% certain. Maybe 80. Heinrich thinks. Then, "This report goes to division with a classification stamp. Eyes only. And you don't mention the words walking in circles in any official documentation. Is that clear?" "Crystal, Herr Oberst." The report that goes to division is carefully worded. "Evidence suggests American reinforcement estimates for Hurtgen sector may have been inflated due to sophisticated deception operations involving coordinated unit movements designed to create false impression of strength. Recommend reducing reinforcement estimates by approximately 60 to 70%. Division reads it, doesn't quite understand it, and sits on it for 2 weeks before filing it under anomalous intelligence. By then, the Americans have launched their main offensive 15 miles north, the one Hartley's deception was covering for, and the 2 German battalions pulled into the Hurtgen as reinforcements are exactly where they're not needed. But among German intelligence officers in the Hurtgen, a legend starts circulating. The Americans have a ghost division. Units that appear and disappear. Phantom reinforcements. Some say it's special operations. Others say it's new infiltration doctrine. Nobody wants to admit they were fooled by 127 exhausted men walking in well-timed circles. In a letter found later, Feldwebel Klaus Richter wrote to his brother, "The Americans are magicians. They make armies appear from nothing. How do you fight an enemy who can multiply himself? You don't. That's the point. Hartley expects the court-martial. He's violated defensive posture orders, risked a company-size element on unauthorized operations, and technically abandoned defensive positions during enemy contact, which is a fancy way of saying almost desertion. The after-action report is filed by Lieutenant Colonel Mackenzie, who has to explain why his battalion's sector showed heavy troop movements on November 8th, despite being under strength and on defensive orders. Mackenzie sits across from Hartley in a bunker that smells like cigarette smoke and unwashed men. "Major, your little magic show worked." "Sir?" "Intelligence intercepted German radio traffic. They repositioned 2 battalions here. 2 battalions that were supposed to reinforce the sector we actually attacked." Mackenzie lights a cigarette. "You pulled German reserves into a quiet sector by making them think we were strong. Probably saved 100 lives up north. So no court-martial?" "Oh, there will absolutely be a court-martial if Division finds out what you actually did. So here's what my report says. Major Hartley conducted aggressive night reconnaissance patrols with rotating personnel to maintain operational tempo and present appearance of strength." "That sound accurate to you?" Hartley smiles despite himself. "Very accurate, sir." "Good, because if you ever tell anyone you marched 127 men in circles for 6 hours as psychological warfare, I will personally shoot you for making me look stupid by association." "Understood, sir." Hartley receives a Bronze Star. The citation reads, "For initiative and aggressive leadership in conducting reconnaissance operations under adverse conditions. Zero mention of circles, timing, or theatrical deception. But the technique enters the informal knowledge bank of infantry officers." The Hurtgen Shuffle. Hartley's Loop. Stories get told, usually after enough whiskey that nobody's sure what's true. By 1950, the Army's infantry school at Fort Benning includes a classified case study on deception through simulated force multiplication. Hartley's name appears in footnotes. The case study's conclusion: small units can create impression of larger forces through coordinated movement patterns designed to exploit enemy observation cycles and pattern recognition biases. What it doesn't say, it requires precision timing, exhausted men willing to walk in darkness, and nerves of steel. What it really doesn't say, it's basically stage magic performed with soldiers instead of cards. Thomas Hartley returns to Atlantic City in June 1945. He does not return to the boardwalk. Instead, he becomes a high school math teacher at Atlantic City High School. He teaches geometry, trigonometry, and, when students ask about the war, the mathematics of movement and timing. He keeps his stopwatch in his desk drawer. Never uses it. Students who ask about it get a smile and souvenir. Ruth, who waited through the war, marries him in August 1945. They have 2 children. He never tells them the full story of the Hurtgen loops, just fragments. Dad did something weird in the war. Walked in circles. It confused the Germans. They think it's a joke. He has nightmares, but not about combat. About timing. He'll wake up convinced he's lost count, that the loops are off schedule, that men are walking into observation zones too early or too late. Ruth learns to check his watch, still on his nightstand, and say, 3:22, exactly on schedule, even though she has no idea what schedule she's confirming. In 1952, he's contacted by the Army's Psychological Warfare Division. They want him to consult on deception operations. He declines politely. "I was a magician who had one good trick. I'm not doing it again." In 1968, a young infantry officer, Lieutenant David Chen, tracks him down while researching deception tactics for a staff college thesis. Chen brings declassified reports, German interrogation transcripts, post-war analysis. One document in particular, a German intelligence officer's confession. Klaus Steiner, now retired and living in Munich, had been interviewed about the Hurtgen. When asked about the November 8th reinforcement, he'd laughed bitterly. "We were outsmarted by a man who understood something we didn't. We were watching with our expectations, not our eyes. He showed us a pattern, and we completed it ourselves. We saw what we wanted to see, a threat large enough to justify our defensive posture. The Americans gave us permission to be cautious instead of aggressive, and we took it gladly." Chen asked Hartley, "Do you think deception is ethical? Making the enemy see what isn't there?" Hartley considers. "Takes a long time." Finally, "I made 127 exhausted men walk in circles for 6 hours. They trusted me. Some of them got hurt. Kozlowski lost his foot. The Germans I fooled probably went home after the war thinking they fought honorably against a superior force. They didn't. They fought against a magic trick. Is that wrong? I don't know. I saved lives. Probably hundreds. But I did it by lying. To the enemy, to my own command structure, to the men I asked to trust me. The math on whether that was right is harder than the geometry of the loops. Would you do it again? In those specific conditions, with those specific stakes, knowing what I knew?" Hartley looks at the documents. "Yes, every time, because the alternative was real soldiers dying in real combat, and if I could prevent that with theatre and timing, then yes. But I don't feel good about it. That's the part they don't teach at staff colleges." He dies in 1987, age 73, of a heart attack. The obituary mentions his teaching career, his Bronze Star, his family. It doesn't mention the loops. At his funeral, Mike Torres, now retired, white-haired, tells the story to Hartley's children. They're hearing it in detail for the first time. When Torres describes marching through the Hurtgen in darkness, bleeding feet, exhausted beyond reason, following a commander who asked them to trust his timing, Hartley's son asks the question, "Why did you do it? Why did you trust him?" Torres thinks. Because he never lied about what he was asking. He said it was insane. He said it might not work. But he believed in the mathematics, and somehow that was enough. When a man shows you the math and asks you to trust it, even when the math seems impossible, you do. That's what command is. That's what we did. After the service, 3 other members of Group 1 attend. Old men now, barely recognizing each other. They don't talk about the war much. But Spicer pulls out a compass and a stopwatch, replicas of the ones they carried, and sets them on the grave. Chen, who attended the funeral, photographs it, includes it in his published thesis on military deception. The caption reads, "Navigation tools used during Operation Hurtgen Loop, November 1944. Small unit deception operation, 127 personnel, resulted in enemy force repositioning estimated at battalion strength." It doesn't mention that those tools were used to time men walking in circles. It doesn't mention the bleeding feet, the terror of navigating minefields in darkness, the sheer psychological weight of marching past enemy positions multiple times hoping they wouldn't notice. It doesn't mention Kozlowski, who spent the rest of his life with a prosthetic foot and never quite explained to his grandchildren how he lost it. Training accident was easier than "I stepped on a mine while walking in circles to confuse Germans." It just shows the tools, the mathematics. The 7-1 force multiplication ratio, 127 men appearing as approximately 900. The rest, the fog, the exhaustion, the moment when Torres realized he'd passed the same shattered oak tree for the 5th time and his brain briefly couldn't process whether he was advancing or retreating. That's lost to summary. At Fort Benning's infantry school, there's a small display in the Maneuver Center of Excellence. It's easy to miss, tucked in a hallway between classrooms where young officers learn combined arms tactics. The placard reads, "Hurtgen Forest Deception Operation, November 1944, Exploitation of Enemy Intelligence Cycles." The display includes a map showing 3 overlapping loops, timing annotations, German observation post positions, a photograph, grainy, barely visible, of soldiers moving through fog. What it doesn't show is the moment at 0612 when Kozlowski stepped on the mine and the entire operation nearly collapsed because one man's injury could break the timing that held the whole illusion together. It doesn't show Spicer's face when he made the decision to leave Kozlowski behind with a medic, knowing he was gambling that Group 3 would find them, that the Germans wouldn't hear the whispered coordinates, that Kozlowski wouldn't bleed out in the 20 minutes before evacuation. It doesn't show Warren at hour 5 navigating by compass because his eyes wouldn't focus anymore, trusting his feet to follow a route his conscious mind had stopped processing. It doesn't show Hartley standing in the forest at 09:47 hours, watching Torres collapse, realizing that he'd asked men to march until their bodies quit, and they'd actually done it because he'd shown them the mathematics and said, "Trust me." The display just shows the result: enemy force repositioning, mission success, tactical deception validated. Because you can teach the theory, you can teach timing and observation cycles and pattern recognition psychology. You can teach officers to look for unconventional solutions and to think like magicians instead of soldiers. But you can't teach someone to look 127 exhausted men in the eye and say, "I need you to walk in circles through a minefield in the dark for 6 hours, and if you're 90 seconds off schedule, the entire thing fails," and have them say, "Yes, sir," and do it. That's not doctrine. That's not tactics. That's something else entirely. Something that lives in the space between mathematics and faith, between the timing works on paper and the timing works when men can barely stand. Hartley understood that space. He'd lived in it his whole life, on the boardwalk, making tourists see impossible things, learning that the gap between what's real and what people believe is real is just timing and psychology. On November 8, 1944, he brought that understanding to the Hürtgen forest. For 6 hours, 127 men became an army. Not because they multiplied, not because of secret weapons or special training, because a former stage magician understood that the human brain completes patterns, and if you show someone the beginning of a pattern they expect, they'll see the rest whether it's there or not. The Germans expected reinforcements. They were watching for reinforcements. Hartley gave them reinforcements. 127 men appearing and reappearing at mathematically precise intervals that matched the spacing of a division-strength column. The Germans saw what they expected. Their brains completed the pattern. They reported a ghost army, repositioned battalions to counter a threat that existed only in timing and choreography. And somewhere in Wehrmacht headquarters, intelligence officers filed reports about American force strength in the Hürtgen sector, never realizing they'd been watching the same 127 men walk in circles for 6 hours. Because the best magic tricks are the ones where the audience never realizes they've been fooled. Torres kept marching until 09:47 because the mathematics said to. Because Hartley had shown him the loops, the timing, the observation points, and said, "This works if we're precise." And Torres believed in precision more than he believed in exhaustion. Spicer left Kozlowski behind because the mathematics said the timing mattered more than one man's immediate evacuation. And he lived with that decision for 43 years until Kozlowski showed up at a reunion and said, "You made the right call, Lieutenant. I'd have made the same one." Warren navigated blind through fog at hour 5 because the mathematics said bearing 075 for 600 paces, and his body trusted the math even when his mind was gone. Hartley asked them to do impossible things, and they did them. And afterwards, nobody could quite explain why, except the mathematics worked, and when mathematics works, you trust it even when your body says stop. That's the part they don't teach at staff colleges. That's the part that can't be taught. You can teach the loops, the timing, the observation cycles. You can't teach the moment when a man's feet are bleeding in his boots and he's seen the same tree 5 times and his brain is screaming, "This is wrong, this is insane, this is going to get you killed," and he keeps walking anyway because a former stage magician showed him numbers on a map and said, "Trust this." Hartley died believing he'd done something unethical, something that worked but shouldn't have been asked. Ruth found notes in his desk after he died, calculations, timings, alternative routes he'd considered. At the bottom of one page, in handwriting that shook, "Asked too much. They gave it anyway. That's the part I can't reconcile." But Torres, at the funeral, said something Ruth remembered. "He never asked us to do anything he didn't believe was possible. That's rare. Most officers ask for miracles and hope. Major Hartley showed us the mathematics and asked us to execute. We did. That's not unethical. That's respect. Maybe that's true. Maybe asking men to do precisely what the numbers say is possible, even when it seems impossible, is the opposite of asking too much. Or maybe it's both. Maybe the mathematics of leadership, the calculation of what can be asked versus what should be asked, is harder than the geometry of loops through the Hurtgen. Hartley never solved that equation. He taught high school geometry for 32 years, showed thousands of students how angles and distances work, never told any of them that he once used those principles to turn 127 men into a phantom army. The stopwatch in his desk drawer stopped working in 1956. He never replaced the battery. When students asked why he kept it, he'd say, "Reminder." Reminder of what? That timing matters. That was true. But the complete answer, that timing matters, because when you ask exhausted men to march in circles through a minefield, 90 seconds of error means the illusion breaks and people die. That answer he kept to himself. The loops are still there, or were until the forest regrew. The Hurtgen was replanted after the war, young trees covering the stumps and shell craters. But if you knew where to look in the 1960s, you could still see the traces. Packed earth where feet had passed multiple times, compressed into trails that made no tactical sense unless you knew they were circles, not advances. Chen, researching his thesis, hiked them in 1968. Brought a compass and Hartley's original route notes, classified until 1965, then declassified and archived. Chen walked Loop 1, timing himself. 2 hours, 47 minutes. Longer than Hartley's men managed. Chen wasn't navigating in darkness, wasn't exhausted, wasn't worried about mines or German observation posts. And he still took 27 minutes longer than the schedule demanded. He understood, walking that loop, what Hartley had asked, what Torres and Spicer and Warren had delivered. In his thesis, Chen wrote, "The Hurtgen deception operation succeeded not because of novel tactics or superior equipment, but because of precise execution of a mathematically sound plan under conditions that should have made precision impossible." That gap between theoretical possibility and practical execution represents the human element of military operations that cannot be quantified or taught, only witnessed. His thesis advisor marked that paragraph and wrote in the margin, "Be specific. What is the human element?" Chen couldn't answer. Still can't. He's a retired colonel now, teaches at the War College, uses the Hurtgen case study in classes on deception operations. Students always ask the same question. Would this work today? Mathematically, yes, Chen always answers. Practically, only if you have soldiers willing to trust mathematics over instinct and a commander willing to ask them to. How do you train that? You don't. You recognize it and hope you're lucky enough to have it when you need it. That's not a satisfying answer. The students want concrete lessons, applicable doctrine, something they can take to their next assignment. Chen can't give them that because Hartley couldn't have given him that. The Hurtgen loops weren't doctrine. They were desperation mathematics executed by men who were either brave enough or crazy enough to trust the timing over their terror. Probably both. Definitely both. And 43 years later, at Hartley's funeral, the men who walked those loops stood in a cemetery in New Jersey and couldn't explain to his children why they'd trusted him except he showed us the numbers, and the numbers worked. And when numbers work, you trust them even when trust seems impossible. That's math of a different kind. The kind you can't teach. The kind you just do, or don't, and live with the result. Hartley lived with it for 42 years. Taught geometry to kids who had no idea their teacher had once used angles and distances to create a ghost army. Woke up at 0347 sometimes, checking his watch, convinced he was late, that the timing was off, that men were walking into observation zones, and German artillery was falling. Ruth would say, 3:22, exactly on schedule, even in 1985, even though the war was 40 years past and the schedule didn't exist anymore. It was enough. Most nights. Because the loops ended at 0947 on November 8, 1944. But the timing never really stopped. It kept running in Hartley's head, in Torres's feet, in Spicer's dreams, in Warren's unconscious compass calculations. 127 men walked circles through the Hurtgen forest for 6 hours, and in that time they became something else, something larger. Not through multiplication or reinforcement, but through mathematics and trust. They became what the Germans expected to see, and when the fog lifted and the loops ended, they went back to being 127 exhausted men with bleeding feet and a story they could barely believe themselves. But for 6 hours, they were an army. Not because they were strong, because one man understood that being strong and appearing strong are different things, and sometimes the appearance is enough. That's all magic ever was. That's all it ever is.